Okay, we are on Orkney, and we did not have a good time getting there. I was getting secondhand stress just having to describe it again. Watch the last episode for why that is. But now we were finally on the islands and we could actually make good on all the things we wanted to see. So we got a hire car, or rather this red postal looking van. The hire car place was out of cars, but this was the same price, so sure, why not? Perhaps unsurprisingly, even though the bus network on the islands is, well, it's not too bad. Surprise, surprise, if you want to get to the good stuff, which is all around the perimeter, you'll need a car, or maybe a bike if you're prepared to risk it with the weather. Oh, and just before we departed Kirkwall, we stopped off here, and it was pretty great actually. These guys know what they're doing with coffee. Well, first stop, the top eastern corner of the mainland. There's a few things clustered together. First of all, there's the gloop, so named for the sound the sea makes as it enters the gap in these cliffs in this narrow gully. Onwards a little bit further. Now, it's been a long time since I've had any exposure to Enid Blyton, but I don't see how, as a kid or an adult, you could not get excited about a landscape like this. Hidden coves, waves crashing against the cliffs, rocks to scramble over. This is the Broch of Deer Ness, which, I'm sorry, I cannot get enough of that title. Whenever I hear the Broch of Deer Ness, I can only picture the cliffs being stalked by a figure like... It gets better too. You see this? Okay, it doesn't stand out too much at first. This is a Norse church. It's pretty much the only visible remains of what was believed to be a significant Viking settlement here. And for the non-history nerds, like, sure, it's not exactly Fountains Abbey. It might not look like all that much. I mean, what about all the other Viking remains across Britain? Yeah, about that. What Viking remains specifically? You think there's whole Viking buildings just sitting in the landscape? Mate, you wish. I mean, I wish. Scotland and the Isle of Man already have us beat, but as far as England goes, this door, not the building, amazing Romanesque doorway though it does contain, just this door might be Viking in origin. But even this, the dating is disputed. It might predate the church, which was founded in around 1150. The Viking details may suggest a pre-conquest date, but even that might be too optimistic. By English standards, this would represent substantial Viking remains compared to what's actually left in the landscape of England, aka nothing. I mean, sure, you'll get a reconstructed hall here and there, and yeah, brilliant, but actual Viking remains other than museum pieces? Nothing. Really, I know it seems unlikely, but nothing. Actual nothing. That's why the Norse structures on Orkney are pretty exceptional. Definitely in danger of veering off topic here, but it does strain credulity of just how little of Viking architecture has survived in the landscape. I'm on a bit of a side quest visiting Saxon churches currently, and I don't know, maybe one of these pre-conquest structures might sneak in as Norse on a technicality if it was over the boundary into the Danelaw for a few years, say. For a change, I'm actually quite happy to be owned in the comments on this one because I expect I've missed something and earthworks are admissible, but don't embarrass yourself by pointing out this is because of the early medieval proclivity for wooden structures, as if you're the first person in the room to point that out. Anyway, back to Deer Ness. It is a stunningly evocative location. It's just amazing to spend time in. This is what I was talking about when I say how amazing Orkney is. We are spoilt for spectacular coastlines in Dorset, but this is something really special. So crossing the island to the south, and to our surprise, the sun actually came out. Now this is the Church of Orfear, and it's another Viking site, and you can see the foundations of a hall as well as a round church, both built in around the 1100s. It's definitely not nothing, it's not huge either. I mean, it's a significant site in the history of the island. So, we had the fleeting chance to see the islands in the sunshine. The visibility was limited on most days, so you couldn't admire the views of the bay and Hoy, which are really spectacular when you can actually see them. And while it was sunny, since it was on our way, we took the opportunity to spend a bit more time at the Ring of Brodgar, which was even more beautiful under blue skies. I could have just easily spent a day there, just taking in the view, enjoying shooting it from different compositions, but we had more things we wanted to see, and we didn't have the hire car for long. And in the 20 or so minutes as we drove to the northwestern corner of the island, the blue skies had already vanished. There's the ruined hall of Robert Stewart, who became Earl of Orkney and built this palace between about 1569 and 1574, but the Stewart Earls were overthrown in 1615 and it was abandoned. It's a great free spot just to wander around, but this was actually a side quest to what we were there to see. This is the Broch of Beersay. And look, I know none of these sound right coming out of my mouth, but I'd catch a lot more flack if I started being all like, the Broch of Beersay, the Ring of Brodgar, the Stones of Sten... Okay, I'll stop. I'm just stuck with this stuffy English accent like a nervously fastidious hotel concierge, and there's not a lot I can do about it. Back to the Broch of Beersay, it's an island with a tidal causeway. It's striking enough from a distance, but the views as you cross the causeway, which is a massive slippery death trap by the way, but it's a beautiful landscape, and, well, you're probably not surprised by this now, but more Viking ruins. While there are some more domestic structures here, the main visible masonry is from a church that occupied the site. This area was actually a significant seat of power in the Isles before Kirkwall took over as the main settlement. Obviously you need to keep an eye on the tide times if you want to walk out there, but definitely recommend it. The cliffs on the western side of Orkney are particularly spectacular, so we stopped off at Marwick Head for a walk. Again, the rugged outer edge of the island did not disappoint. And after all the stress of getting to Orkney, this is all the stuff I've been looking forward to. This is what we meant when we said Orkney was spectacular. And we were about to get even more fortunate. This is Skara Brae, and according to Historic Scotland, it was closed. And long before we arrived, I had resigned myself that at best I might get a peek at one of the most spectacular prehistoric sites on the island. But because the plague had closed up most of the historic sites, there was just nothing to be done about it. But it was open. The visitor site was closed, but as it turned out, there was just a little gate to access the site, and there were people coming in and out, and I could not contain my excitement. Skara Brae is one of the most remarkable prehistoric sites in Northern Europe. I mean, standing stones are great, but they give you very little on how people actually lived. But by complete chance, a particularly violent storm in 1850 swept back the earth and sand to reveal a near-complete Neolithic village buried in the dunes. The domestic details on show are really quite remarkable. The most eye-catching part of the site is this dresser, in quote marks, a set of stone shelves used for whatever sundry items the inhabitants wanted to store. There are the compartments where people slept, the hearths in the centre of the dwellings. The drainage system of the site is still intact. Each dwelling is accessed through low passages, and the way in which you can see the intimate details of life from around 5,000 years ago is just exceptional, and the fact that we still got to see it was a huge relief. I feel like I don't have to underline this, but do make this a priority. It really is something special. Well, to finish off the day, we were hoping we might be able to get a decent coffee in Stromness. This cappuccino, well, it definitely existed. But having had a very full day of exploring Orkney, pretty much an episode in a day, we went home really happy. However, despite hitting all the highlights we could on the mainland, we still wanted to see some of the other islands. Now, the amount there is to see on other islands varies considerably. I mean, sure, if you have a month, collect the whole set. I mean, why not? But ferries are limited. It's very much just like a local practical boat service that, sure, needs to run to keep people connected, but isn't going to be running many times a day necessarily. You'll need to check times from orkneyferries.co.uk. The site is constantly updated with travel status, and you'll need to have a look through some of the timetables. Well, Hoy was pretty much non-negotiable. It's easily the highest and most dramatic of all the islands. As for the others, we were hoping to do Rousay, but all of the Neolithic cairns on the island were closed and locked, which sadly pretty much made the decision for us. But anyway, it was going to be Hoy first. So that morning we dropped the hire van back with a full tank, which means we were back in Costa del Kirkwall. It was then a short hop back across the islands to catch a ferry from Stromness. We'd allowed a fair amount of time hoping to find a half-decent coffee somewhere in Stromness. I've got to be straight with you. I mean, I sort of intimated this to you already, but try as we might, we found it impossible to lean into the bleakness of Stromness. It's kind of a stone-cold bummer. It just really chills any joy right out of your chest. And it's not like it doesn't have its moments. I think it's because rather than feeling like a historic town, the telltale pebble dash that we talked about last time, and yes, some rather thoughtless architectural touches from the mid-20th century, I mean, it's nearly there. If there was more of this and less of this, I could definitely get immersed. Oh, and we basically didn't find any promising coffee. Most of the shops just tucked a Nescafe vending machine in the corner. Well, ferry over there, nothing fancy, but sure, it gets you where you need to be, and we were greeted with some exquisitely moody panoramas on our way into the island. Now, Hoy is quite different from the other islands. Generally, in the Orkney Islands, wherever there's space, there's farmland, whereas Hoy, particularly because of its high elevation, is largely wild. In fact, crucially, if it wasn't for this bus, you'd essentially be stuck. There isn't some official public transport, there's just this local guy who figured it needed doing and does it for a small fee. Without this guy, it'd be the whole island on foot or nothing, and it's at least 2 hours to cross north to south on foot, so yeah, what a hero. Now, What a lot of people do on Hoy is follow the overland trail to see the Old Man of Storr, which we were tempted to do, but partly because we had such spectacular views of it on the way in, we were more than happy to just vibe on Hoy for a while, and I'm really glad we did. We made our way slowly from the hostel down to Rackwick Beach, and as remote beaches go, this was a gift. There was a fire burning itself out while we were there, but we never saw the people who lit it. We didn't see anyone else down there. So Hoy was proving to be the most serene part of the trip yet. I wish I could leave it there with nothing but glowing reviews, but there was this little thing, in fact, a few billion little things, and I did not know that this was a thing up in the Highlands. I always assumed that tiny insects mainly hung out where there is hot and humid weather, but midges? Yes, this is unfortunately where our day took a bit of a turn. We were walking back along the road that crosses Hoy, and look, sure, all experienced walkers can scoff that we didn't know about this already, but oh my goodness. Bear in mind, this is something that's virtually impossible to see on camera in all but very specific shots. But you will know about it when they hit you. Out of nowhere, a plentiful swarm of midges just decided that we needed harassing. They're essentially there because of the sitting groundwater, and this is why it's not so much of a problem on the other islands, as the majority of the land is farmers' fields. But yes, if you're going between April and October, chances are a few billion of these guys will be saying hi all at once with a playful peck on the cheek. With nothing else to do but pull a Fellowship of the Ring and run, we just had to do our best to scamper away and swat the rest. We did have this one thing we particularly wanted to see, and yeah, you'd have to know where to look, otherwise you'd miss this entirely. It's basically the Neolithic highlight of Hoy. This is the Dwarfy Stain, which basically just means dwarf stone. I mean, you probably could have worked that out for yourselves. It's a tomb cut out of one big rock, which is a bit unusual. Normally Neolithic tombs are much more about pulling lots of not quite as large rocks to make something, which, well, that's probably slightly less work than carving a chamber out of solid rock. It had started to spit, and that seemed to be slightly fending off the midges. It gave us a little breathing room to enjoy the landscape, but they'd be back periodically. We were hoping that the one cafe by the pier would be open, but sadly not. I mean, yeah, there's not enough people around Mones to keep a cafe open, so unless you're getting modest footfall over on the ferry, there's not much incentive to open. We hadn't planned on making it back quite this soon, but having jogged across half the island to escape the midges, we had a rather long wait just sitting at the ferry terminal. We would have sat outside, but yeah. So, Hoy, really beautiful. This is what I hoped Orkney would be like, minus the flying death. That secluded farmhouse in a lush landscape view. Yet sad thing is, most of the time you see any building standing alone on the other islands, it's not some romantic, rustic... yeah, it's just all pebble dash again. You know what? We've already done this. It's just a shame, I guess. Well, the mist rolled in, ferry home, but Hoy was pretty great. So our last full day in the islands, we were going to have a look further north of the Orkney mainland to the smaller islands that taper into the North Sea. Kirkwall again, spot of coffee at this Italian place that also did breakfast. Now while we were there, we needed to book a cab for the ferry early tomorrow. After the drama of getting there, we were not leaving anything to chance. So, called the Stromness cab company. He asked my name, time and place, etc. Then asked a few more questions and said, "Are you a tourist?" So I said, yes. And he said, and I quote, "The Orkney taxis have decided we're not going to help tourists," and then just hung up. So, let's just let that sit for a moment. Basically, out of pure spite, the Orkney cab companies were refusing to transport us. A quick look at reviews online turns out that others were having pretty much the same experience. I mean, what a petty, spiteful thing to do. I mean, obviously, didn't feel like ringing every taxi company just so each of them had the opportunity to dunk on us outsiders one by one. So yeah, that just drained my energy. Plus, there was now a very real possibility we would miss our ferry again. You see, in theory, there was supposed to be one bus that might hopefully get us there on time. And where had I heard that before? But if that went wrong, if that one bus was even slightly late, it would result in a cascade where we would have to rebook every single leg of our journey back. That's ferry, then train, then plane, all of it. Gone. It's something about being on an island. Even if you're in the furthest reaches of northern Scotland, if you're on the same landmass as your house, there's just an upper limit on how bad it can really get. You know, like worst case scenario, you can call up a mate and they can get down there somehow. Out here on the islands, you have no control. You are at the mercy of a very small number of travel operators, and in plague times, our choices were even slimmer than normal. So now, stressed out and not remotely having a good time, we were still trying to enjoy our day. Our aim was to get to the small island of Westray in the north of the archipelago. But I was already questioning if we should even get on this ferry. Seemed like we were only increasing the odds of getting stuck somewhere. And I'm not being overdramatic either. There are not a flotilla of different companies going to these places. It's basically one company, one boat, there and back, twice a day. Miss it? Well, feel free to cry about it. The ferry itself was a larger, more brutish ship that could carry larger lorries, but thanks to the plague, or perhaps just as normal, they just left all the passengers in this outside deck. There were just a few scattered seats indoors, but having passengers seemed to be a bit of an afterthought. What's more, this is where I wish I could show you the different islands as we passed them, show you what some of the other places in Orkney look like, but due to the omnipresent clouds and mist, well, there's E-Day. You like that? How you like this footage of utter nothingness? How about this gorgeous panoramic of oblivion? These weirdly massive jellyfish kept disappearing into our swell, though I never did get a proper shot of them. Look, if it's not apparent, I was having a bad day. That was mostly travel stress, but this might look serene when you're watching it at home, but it has a heaviness and almost oppressive quality when you're there. More fun was to come. While it hadn't been explicitly stated anywhere, the ferry to Westray, that is a separate island from Westray, just in case you're confused, but it didn't actually head to Wall, where we were catching the connecting ferry to Pape, but to Rapness, a casual 7 miles away. I mean, at this point, I'd just given up. Like, yeah, you know what? Fine. We'll just do little to nothing on Westray if we have to for 6 hours. I mean, I have no energy to fight this anymore. But thankfully, as it turned out, there is an internal minibus to cross the island, though it still looked like we were going to miss the Pape ferry, but whatever. I mean, Westray, man, that place was desolate. I know the weather is a strong factor here, but this was, like, really hard to love. The minibus got to Wall 10 minutes late. But what's this? The ferry is still there? It waited for us? What kind of witchcraft is this? Am I to assume that this is some degree of practical common sense with the sort of personal touch you would expect in a small island community? Okay, I know you're sick of me sounding off about Northlink now, but I'm not letting it go. So, yeah, ferry to Westray. I've held off explaining why we'd chosen this island in particular. Well, as I said, the diffusion of things worth seeing is not spread entirely equally between islands, and Pape has a couple of standout highlights. First of all, there was a pleasant surprise as we pulled in. Despite the unyielding clouds above us, the waters were remarkably clear and turquoise, not least when compared to the sort of deep charcoal black of the seas elsewhere. On a nice day, these would have been a real hidden gem. But we started walking. Despite its remoteness and comparative small size, it's not an untouched paradise. It's agriculture for the most part. Every so often there were rusted out machinery parts on the roadside, looking for all the world like ancient creatures frozen in the landscape. Credit where it's due, Orkney really does know how to do a ruined farmhouse. Location scouts take note. On the western shore of the island, about a third of the way up, is the Nap of Hoar. You know, it's funny, I could put pretty much any object on screen right now and tell you it's the Nap of Hoar, and you'd have no way of knowing any different. But this is the Nap of Hoar. You could call it Skara Brae Mark II, though apparently this is even earlier, so really this is more like Skara Brae Mark I. In fact, they've gone as far as the oldest stone houses in northwestern Europe. But there's a few notable caveats to that, so I'd be interested to see what the competition for that title is. Suffice to say, they are unusually old, with habitation going back to around 3700 BC. And more surprising yet, the sun had come out. Did not see that coming. So we parked up on the grass and had some lunch, and just felt the warmth on our faces. Now, lovely though this was, the gap in the clouds was brief, and so it wasn't long before we were on the move again and the mist had descended once more. Pape actually has an airport. It's amusingly diminutive and probably the least secure airfield I've ever seen. It has the interesting claim to fame of operating the shortest flight in the world. You can take off from Westray and land on Pape in about 2 minutes. It's actually quite clever how they've leveraged this, so the geography completionists from around the world have little choice but to visit this more remote part of the archipelago if they want to unlock that achievement. We dropped in on what was labelled as this Dark Age church, though historians generally hate that label, so probably don't use that. Look, I'll speed things up here. It's been rebuilt about 3 times since its foundation in the 700s, and while it's a cool little bit of history, it appears there isn't any original masonry, making this title a little spurious, but fine, whatever. Retracing our steps a little, we found the small centre of Papay. I mean, credit where it's due, this is not just some middle of nowhere. There's a shop, a school, a church, a post office, post collected 6 days of the week. There's even a fire station on the island. They've pretty much got everything you would find on one of those toy car playmats. And for a population that's barely scraping triple figures, that's pretty good going. We were trying to reach a ruined chapel which is on a peninsula in the lake, but time was running out, and in the mist I couldn't determine if this was just going to be a big detour, so the closest we got was this. So the travel stress hanging over us had pretty much ruined our day. It was hard to enjoy our final day while stressing that we might need to repurchase every single travel connection because of a few xenophobic cab drivers who wanted to get back at us for having the temerity to visit their islands. Well, up the next morning at a very blowy 4:30 a.m, the light was a bit weird, my camera didn't really know what to do with it. Huddled under a bus shelter in the desperate hope that the one bus that could get us to Stromness and onto our ferry would actually show up. It did, but it looked as if we would still miss the golden 30-minute window that Northlink insist on, despite the fact that clearly most of the passengers were also going to be trying to board this ferry. So we literally ran off the bus and into the terminal. The ticket lady looked a little taken aback at how manic we looked, but yes, to our immense relief, we made it onto the ferry. Undoubtedly, the islands are a challenging place to live, and I don't in the least bit disparage the residents who live there. I mean, I just wasn't expecting our travel connections to fight us and hang over our heads like the perpetual dark clouds that were blanketing the island. We had at the very least managed to get a cab from Scrabster Ferry to Thurso. There's no way we're leaving that turnaround to chance again. Well, because virtually no one, not even on remote Orkney, was handling cash because of the plague, I had just assumed that the cab driver would take card, but he didn't. I asked if he could drop us at a cash point, but he said there wasn't one nearby, and I had a couple of seconds of silent dread, like, oh my goodness, now what? But then he just said, oh, don't worry. I was just completely floored by that. I mean, the fare was only about £7.20, so it's not the money, but in a week where the Orkney taxi companies had collectively punished us for the crime of being visitors, this guy just waived our fare, just to be nice. We protested and said we would jog to a cash machine or transfer online to any bank account, but he was calmly adamant that we just not worry, and then off he went. So, look, this does more amply demonstrate than any number of paragraphs I could write. The unpleasantness we received is not particular to Scots or even Scottish cab drivers. I mean, what a guy. As one of the last Scots we encountered on our journey, this guy did his country proud. And then after that, as you can see, the Highlands did give us one hell of a parting show. On a day with solid rain forecast, we instead got radiant blue skies over mountains draped in heather and pristine rugged beaches with all the unspoken wish you were here. So the coda to all of this is that by the time we were on the mainland, I was already feeling 500% more positive around Scotland than just a few hours ago. Okay, now we really are done. I'm not going to write a concluding paragraph. We've covered enough ground. If you follow the channel, you'll know that before this, we took a couple of episodes to do a deep dive into the prehistory of the Balearic Islands. Now, I know Orkney might seem like a good candidate to do exactly the same. Thing is, since half of the sites we wanted to hit were closed, thanks to the plague, I just couldn't bring myself to do half of everything, and I would never hear the end of it if I tried to do a Neolithic Orkney episode without any coverage of Maze How. Plus, we're already gathering steam for a Neolithic series at some point in the future, so yeah, trust, we will pay that off when we get there for sure. There's a video for the overture we composed for Hoy from all the amazing cliff shots we got on the way in, so throw that one. And if you want more, all the music for these episodes we compose ourselves. The Orkney EP is now up on bandcamp.com. If you want to support the channel, that's the place to do it. Next time, I'm actually not 100% what the next episode is going to be. I've been building towards doing a set of episodes on the Dorset Jurassic coast. Those will be coming soon. It'll actually be the first time we do any episodes from England. But I think the next episodes on the channel will probably be the Crete episodes. It's hard actually because both of those two places mean so much to us. I just don't really want to pull the trigger and actually make the episodes. You always just want to hold off a bit longer to get more footage and just get it a little bit better. But no, we'll at the very least get to one of those, and we'll catch you very soon.